The schoolhouse door hung crooked on its hinges, and Beatrice Davies stood in the doorway watching another family wagon roll away toward their farm, knowing full well that young Timothy wouldn't return until after the harvest season ended in late October. She pressed her palm against the weathered wood frame, counting silently in her head. 15 students had filled these benches when September began 3 weeks ago. Now only 7 remained, and she knew by tomorrow that number would drop to 6 when the Hendersons came to collect their daughter Mary for the cotton harvest. Chloride, New Mexico Territory, wasn't much to look at in the autumn of 1882. The silver mining boom had faded, leaving behind a skeleton crew of optimistic prospectors and families who'd put down roots too deep to tear up easily. The land stretched wide and unforgiving in every direction, dotted with creosote bushes and the occasional stubborn juniper. The mountains rose in the distance like sleeping giants, their peaks touching a sky so blue it hurt to look at for too long. Beatrice turned back to face her remaining students. At 23 years old, she'd arrived in Chloride 6 months ago from Philadelphia, full of Eastern idealism and a trunk full of books. Her father had died of cholera. Her mother remarried quickly to a man who made it clear that Beatrice's education and strong opinions weren't welcome in his household. The advertisement for a schoolteacher in the New Mexico Territory had seemed like divine intervention, an escape route dressed up as opportunity. Now she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Miss Davies. Little Emma Porter raised her hand, her blonde braids catching the morning sunlight streaming through the window. "Are we doing arithmetic today?" "Yes, sweetheart. Get your slates ready, please." Beatrice moved to the blackboard, picking up a piece of chalk. Her hands were steady even as her heart sank. By next week, she'd likely be teaching 3 or 4 children in a building meant for 30. The children worked quietly on their sums while Beatrice walked between the benches, checking their work and offering gentle corrections. She'd grown to love these young souls, each one unique and bright in their own way. Samuel Patterson showed a gift for reading that rivaled children twice his age. Mary Henderson could calculate figures faster than Beatrice could write them. Young Tommy Rodriguez spoke 3 languages and translated stories from his grandmother's Spanish tales during their literature hour, and she was losing them all to the harvest. She understood the necessity. These were farming and ranching families who needed every available hand when crops came in. The children worked alongside their parents from dawn until well past dusk, picking cotton, gathering corn, mending fences, moving cattle to winter pastures. Education seemed like a luxury when survival hung in the balance, but it broke her heart nonetheless. When she dismissed the children at 3 o'clock, she remained in the schoolhouse long after their voices faded down the dusty road. She sat at her desk, going over the attendance records, calculating how much longer she could justify keeping the school open. The town council paid her salary, and they'd already expressed concern about the cost of maintaining a teacher for so few students. The sound of boots on the wooden steps outside pulled her from her thoughts. She looked up as a tall figure darkened the doorway, hat in hand. "Pardon me, madam. Would you be Miss Davies, the school teacher?" Beatrice stood, smoothing her skirts. The man who stepped inside was probably in his mid-20s, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that needed a trim. He wore typical ranch clothing, all worn denim and faded cotton, but his eyes caught her attention immediately. They were a striking hazel color, shifting between green and gold depending on how the light hit them, and they held an unusual gentleness for someone who clearly spent his life working hard under the brutal New Mexico sun. "I am. How can I help you, Mr. Orville Tucker, madam?" "I run a cattle ranch about 5 miles north of town. He turned his hat in his hands, a gesture that suggested nervousness. I heard you've been losing students to harvest season. Word travels fast in a small town. Beatrice crossed her arms, not unkindly but cautiously. She'd learned that men in this territory often had opinions about women working, especially educated women from the East. Are you here to tell me that education should wait until after the children help bring in the crops, Mr. Tucker? A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. No, madam. Quite the opposite, actually. That caught her off guard. She gestured to one of the larger benches. Perhaps you should sit down and explain. Orville Tucker lowered himself onto the bench, looking comically large on furniture designed for children. I don't have kids of my own, but I remember what it was like growing up on a ranch. My pa pulled me out of school every harvest season, and by the time I got back, I'd forgotten half of what I learned. By the time I was 12, I stopped going altogether. He met her eyes directly. I can read and write, but just barely. Numbers beyond basic arithmetic might as well be Greek to me. That's unfortunately common out here, Beatrice said softly. It doesn't have to be. Orville leaned forward, his hat dangling between his knees. I've done well with my ranch. Better than most, if I'm being honest. I've got resources. What if I hired hands to help these families with their harvests? Good workers who know their way around a farm or ranch, paid by me. That way the children could stay in school. Beatrice felt her breath catch. Mr. Tucker, that would be extraordinarily expensive. We're talking about at least 8 families, maybe more. The harvest season runs through October, sometimes into November. I'm aware. The cost would be substantial. I'm aware of that too, madam. She studied him carefully, looking for signs of jest or some hidden motive. Men didn't simply offer to spend that kind of money without expecting something in return. Why would you do this? Orville was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of old regret. My younger sister, Clara, was brilliant. Smartest person I ever knew. She could have been a teacher like you or a doctor or anything she wanted, but she never got the chance for education beyond the basics. Died of pneumonia when she was 14, still dreaming about books she'd never get to read. He looked down at his hat. I can't get that time back for her, but maybe I can make sure these kids get their chance. The raw honesty in his voice made Beatrice's throat tighten. She walked to the window, looking out at the empty schoolyard. The families would have to agree. Some of them might see it as charity, and pride runs deep out here. Then we present it differently. A loan if they want, to be paid back over time, or a community investment. However they need to see it so their pride stays intact. Orville stood, approaching the window but keeping a respectful distance. I'm not trying to save anyone, Miss Davies. I'm trying to make sure these children get what Clara never did. Beatrice turned to face him. When could you start? The smile that broke across his face transformed him completely. I can have men ready by tomorrow. I'll need a list of the families and what kind of help they need. They spent the next hour going over details. Beatrice pulled out her attendance records, explaining each family's situation. The Hendersons grew cotton and needed help with picking. The Pattersons raised cattle and needed extra hands for the fall roundup and fence repairs. The Rodriguez family maintained a large vegetable farm that supplied much of the town and required help with harvesting and preservation. Each family had specific needs, and Orville listened carefully, making notes in a small leather journal he pulled from his pocket. You're taking this very seriously, Beatrice observed. It's worth taking seriously. He glanced up from his notes. Education is the difference between surviving and actually living, seems to me. That's surprisingly philosophical for a rancher. Even us simple ranch folk have thoughts now and again, Miss Davies. His tone was teasing, gentle. She felt heat rise to her cheeks. I didn't mean to imply otherwise. I apologize. No offense taken. I know how we must seem to someone from Philadelphia. How did you know I'm from Philadelphia? Small town, remember? Word travels fast. He closed his journal. Also, you say water differently than we do. Despite everything, Beatrice laughed. It felt good, releasing some of the tension she'd been carrying for weeks. I suppose I do. Orville stood, placing his hat back on his head. I'll start visiting the families tomorrow. With your permission, I'd like to mention that you and I discussed this, so they know the school supports the arrangement. Of course. And Mr. Tucker, she walked him to the door. Thank you, truly. This is the kindest thing anyone has done since I arrived in Chloride. People here are good folks, Miss Davies. They just get caught up in surviving sometimes. Makes it hard to see beyond the next harvest, the next winter. He paused on the steps. Maybe together we can help them see a little further. She watched him mount a sturdy bay horse tied to the railing and ride off toward the northern road, dust kicking up from the horse's hooves. Something had shifted in the small schoolhouse that afternoon, though Beatrice couldn't quite name it yet. She felt lighter somehow, as if hope had walked through her door wearing dusty ranch clothes and a battered hat. That evening, she wrote a letter to her former roommate from the teachers' college in Philadelphia, describing the day's events. She found herself spending more time than necessary describing Orville Tucker, his gentle manner and surprising depth. She crossed out that paragraph 3 times before finally leaving it in, sealing the envelope with wax and setting it aside for the weekly mail coach. The next morning brought Mary Henderson back to school, her mother appearing at the door with tears in her eyes. Miss Davies, a man came by our farm last evening, Mr. Tucker from the northern ranch. He's sending 2 workers to help with our cotton harvest at no cost to us. Mrs. Henderson clutched her handkerchief. He said our Mary was too bright to miss even a day of learning. Is this your doing? Mr. Tucker's generosity is his own, Mrs. Henderson. I simply provided information about which families might need assistance. But you put him up to it. He came to me with the idea already formed. Mrs. Henderson stepped closer, lowering her voice. Is he courting you, Miss Davies? The question startled Beatrice so much she nearly dropped the primer she was holding. Certainly not. We only just met yesterday. This is about the children's education, Mrs. Henderson's knowing look suggested she thought otherwise, but she didn't press the issue. Well, whatever inspired it, we're grateful. Mary will be here every day just like she should be. Over the next week, similar scenes repeated themselves. Families appeared at the schoolhouse door, expressing gratitude and disbelief. The Pattersons sent a jar of their prize-winning preserves. The Rodriguez family delivered fresh vegetables. Even crusty old Mr. Morrison, who'd openly questioned the need for a schoolhouse at a town council meeting, stopped by to tip his hat and admit he'd been wrong about the Eastern lady teacher. By the following Monday, all 15 students had returned to their benches. The schoolhouse rang with voices reciting lessons, the scratch of chalk on slates, the rustle of turning pages. Beatrice stood before them feeling a fullness in her chest that she hadn't experienced since arriving in the territory. Orville Tucker didn't visit the school that week, but she heard about him constantly. He'd hired 12 men total, good workers from neighboring counties who needed the employment. He'd negotiated fair wages and arranged housing for those coming from a distance. He personally visited each family to discuss their specific needs and ensure the workers he'd selected were appropriate for their situations. That Mr. Tucker thinks of everything, Martha Patterson mentioned when she dropped off Samuel one morning. The men he sent us actually know cattle. One of them noticed our bull has a bad infection in his hoof that we'd missed. Could have gone lame if not for the catch. Beatrice found herself thinking about Orville at odd moments. While teaching geography, she'd wonder if he'd ever traveled beyond New Mexico territory. During literature hour, she'd catch herself wanting to know if he enjoyed reading, and if so, what stories captured his imagination. She told herself it was simple curiosity about someone who'd shown such unexpected kindness, nothing more. She almost believed it. 2 weeks after their initial meeting, Orville returned to the schoolhouse. Beatrice was cleaning the blackboard after dismissing her students when she heard his boots on the steps. "Mr. Tucker, I was beginning to think you'd forgotten about us." She kept her tone light, professional. "Just giving everyone time to settle into the new arrangements. Thought I'd check in, see how things are going." He removed his hat, and she noticed he'd gotten a haircut since their last meeting. It suited him. "Everything is wonderful. All my students are back, engaged and learning. Thanks to you, we're actually ahead of where I'd hoped we'd be by this point in the term." "That's good to hear." He lingered in the doorway, seeming uncertain. "Would you like to come in? I was about to make some tea." The offer surprised her even as she made it. She didn't typically invite men into the schoolhouse after hours, but somehow Orville Tucker didn't feel like a threat to her reputation or anything else. If it's not too much trouble. She lived in a small room attached to the back of the schoolhouse, barely large enough for a bed, a table, and a small stove. It wasn't much, but she'd made it comfortable with the few possessions she'd brought from Philadelphia and some local touches she'd acquired. A Navajo blanket covered her bed, its geometric patterns in rich reds and golds. Dried flowers hung from the rafters. Books lined a makeshift shelf Tobias from the general store had built for her. Orville stood awkwardly in the doorway while she prepared the tea, clearly uncomfortable in the small domestic space. "You can sit," she said, gesturing to one of the 2 chairs at her table. "I promise I don't bite." That earned a genuine laugh. "No, madam, I don't imagine you do. Though I suspect you have a fierce bark when needed. You have no idea." She poured hot water over the tea leaves, filling 2 mismatched cups. "I once faced down a drunk miner who stumbled into the school during lessons. The language I used would have horrified my mother." "Did he leave?" "Like his boots were on fire." They sat across from each other at the small table, and Beatrice was suddenly very aware of how intimate this felt. The fading afternoon light slanted through her single window, dust motes dancing in the golden beams. The space smelled of chalk dust, old books, and the wild sage she'd bundled and hung to dry. "I wanted to thank you properly," she said, wrapping her hands around her cup. "What you've done is remarkable. Just seemed like the right thing." He blew on his tea, took a careful sip. "Besides, it's good for the community. These families are getting help they need. The workers I hired are earning fair wages and the children are learning. Everyone benefits. Except your bank account. Money's meant to be used for things that matter." He met her eyes over the rim of his cup. "This matters." They talked as the afternoon faded toward evening. Orville told her about his ranch, how he'd started with almost nothing 7 years ago and built it up through hard work and calculated risks. His parents had died of typhoid when he was 19, leaving him and Clara alone. After Clara's death 2 years later, he'd thrown himself into building something lasting, something that would have made his sister proud. Beatrice shared her own story, the full version she'd told no one else in Chloride. Her father's death, her stepfather's casual cruelty, the way he'd called her education a waste of money on a girl who'll just end up married anyway. The desperate relief she'd felt seeing the advertisement for a teacher in the New Mexico territory, even though she'd had to look up where exactly that was on a map. "You miss Philadelphia?" Orville asked. "Sometimes. I miss certain comforts, hot baths whenever I want them, theater performances." libraries with more books than I could read in a lifetime. She looked around her small room. But I don't miss feeling trapped. Here, for all its roughness, I'm free to be myself, to make my own choices. Freedom's worth a lot of missed hot baths. Indeed it is. When Orville finally stood to leave, full darkness had fallen outside. Beatrice walked him through the schoolhouse to the front door, carrying an oil lamp to light their way. "Miss Davies, I was wondering." He paused on the steps, turning back to face her. "The town dance is this Saturday. Would you allow me to escort you?" Her heart performed an acrobatic feat in her chest. "Are you asking me to attend the dance with you, Mr. Tucker?" "I am. Though I should warn you I'm not much of a dancer. Might step on your toes once or twice. I'll take my chances." The words came out before she could second-guess them. His smile could have lit up the entire territory. "I'll collect you at 7 if that suits." "That suits perfectly." She watched him ride off into the darkness, his horse knowing the way home by instinct. When she finally closed the door and returned to her small room, she found herself grinning like one of her students with a gold star on their slate. The next few days passed in a blur of lessons and anticipation. Beatrice told herself not to read too much into a simple invitation to a town dance. Orville Tucker was just being kind, grateful for her help with his project to assist the families. It didn't mean anything beyond that. But she still spent Wednesday evening letting out the waist of her best dress, a deep blue cotton with cream lace at the collar. She'd lost weight since arriving in Chloride, her Eastern softness replaced by the lean strength that came from physical labor and simple food. Thursday evening, she washed and pressed the dress, then washed and dried her hair, brushing it until it shone like polished mahogany in the lamplight. On Friday, Emma Porter approached her desk after lessons with a small bouquet of wildflowers. "My mama says these are for you to wear tomorrow. She says it's been too long since we had a proper romance in Chloride, and everyone's rooting for you and Mr. Tucker." The little girl beamed up at her with gap-toothed innocence. Beatrice felt her cheeks burn. "Emma, Mr. Tucker and I are simply friends. We're both concerned about your education, that's all." "That's what my mama said you'd say. But she also said you get a certain look when someone mentions his name." Emma giggled and scampered back to her seat before Beatrice could respond. Saturday arrived with the kind of clear, crisp weather that made the territory beautiful. The sky stretched endless and blue. The air smelled of pine wood smoke and the last wildflowers of the season, and temperatures were perfect, warm in the sun and pleasantly cool in the shade. Beatrice spent the afternoon in a state of nervous energy, alternating between excitement and anxiety. She changed her mind about her hair 3 times, finally settling on a simple style with loose curls framing her face. She tucked 2 of Emma's wildflowers behind her ear, their purple petals bright against her dark hair. At precisely 7 o'clock, Orville knocked on the schoolhouse door. When she opened it, they both froze. He'd clearly made an effort, too. He wore dark trousers without a speck of dust, a pressed white shirt, and a brown vest that brought out the gold in his eyes. His hair was neatly combed, and he'd shaved recently enough that she could still smell the soap. "Miss Davies, you look beautiful." His voice carried such genuine admiration that she felt her nervousness settle. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Tucker. Orville, please, I think we're past formalities. Only if you call me Beatrice. Beatrice." The way he said her name, careful and warm, sent a pleasant shiver down her spine. "Shall we?" He offered his arm and she took it, letting him help her onto the wagon seat. The town hall stood at the far end of Chloride's Main Street, a large wooden structure that served as meeting place, dance hall, and church on Sundays. As they approached, Beatrice could hear fiddle music spilling out into the evening, accompanied by laughter and stomping feet. Inside, it seemed like the entire town had turned out. Paper lanterns hung from the rafters, casting warm light over the crowd. A small group of musicians occupied one corner, their instruments creating lively melodies. Tables laden with food lined one wall, the combined efforts of every decent cook in the county. Beatrice felt multiple sets of eyes turn their way as they entered. She lifted her chin, refusing to be embarrassed. Let them talk. She was a grown woman accepting the escort of a respectable man to a community dance. There was nothing improper about it. Martha Patterson appeared almost immediately, her husband in tow. "Miss Davies, Mr. Tucker, so glad you both could make it." Her eyes sparkled with barely suppressed delight. "Doesn't our teacher look lovely this evening?" "She does indeed," Orville agreed, seemingly unbothered by the attention. The evening unfolded with unexpected joy. Orville did step on her toes twice during the first dance, but he also made her laugh with his self-deprecating commentary about his lack of grace. He introduced her to ranchers and farmers she hadn't met yet, always with genuine respect in his voice when he spoke about her teaching. Between dances, they sampled the potluck offerings and talked with various townspeople. Beatrice was struck by how differently people treated her now compared to when she'd first arrived. Then, she'd been an outsider, an Eastern curiosity they weren't quite sure what to do with. Now, thanks in large part to Orville's very public support of her school, she was becoming part of the community's fabric. "You've done this deliberately," she said to Orville during a break in the music. They stood near an open window, catching the cool evening breeze. "Done what?" "This. Being seen with me, introducing me around, talking about the school so positively. You're making sure people accept me." He had the grace to look slightly sheepish. "Maybe a little. Thought it couldn't hurt. Why do you care so much? About the school, about me, about all of it?" Orville was quiet for a moment, watching the dancers begin another reel. "You really don't know?" "Know what?" He turned to face her fully, his expression more serious than she'd seen before. "Beatrice, from the moment I heard about the Eastern schoolteacher who'd come all the way to Chloride to teach children nobody else seemed to care about educating, I was intrigued. And then I met you, and intrigued didn't begin to cover it." Her breath caught. "Orville, I'm not good with fancy words, but I think you're remarkable. Your dedication, your spirit, the way you actually see these children as individuals worth investing in. The way you stood up to a drunk miner with nothing but your wits and your courage." He took a careful step closer. "The harvest hands, the school support, it's all real and it's all important. But if I'm being honest, it was also an excuse to be part of your life." Before Beatrice could respond, the music started up again, a slower tune this time. Orville extended his hand. "Dance with me. I promise to do better about your toes." She placed her hand in his, let him lead her onto the floor. This dance was different from the energetic reels and squares they'd done earlier. This was intimate, his hand at her waist, their bodies close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I'm not remarkable," she said softly, picking up their conversation. "I'm just a woman trying to make a difference in a small corner of the world." "That's what makes you remarkable." His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "Most people just accept things as they are. You see what they could be and work to make it real. You're doing the same thing. Most wealthy ranchers wouldn't spend their resources helping farming families they barely know. Maybe we're both a little foolish then. Or maybe we see clearly what matters." They swayed together in the lamplight, the fiddle's melody wrapping around them like a blessing. Beatrice let herself relax into the moment, into the surprising rightness of being in Orville Tucker's arms. She'd come to the New Mexico territory looking for escape and found purpose instead. Now, Perhaps she was finding something even more unexpected. When the dance ended, Orville didn't immediately release her. They stood there, hands still joined, looking at each other with new understanding. "I should probably get you home before people really start talking," he said, though he made no move to step away. "Probably." She didn't move either. He smiled, that gentle expression that transformed his weather-worn features into something approaching beautiful. "But maybe we could take the long way." They left the dance hall hand in hand, collecting her shawl from where she'd left it and stepping out into the cool night. Instead of heading directly back to the schoolhouse, Orville guided the wagon north, toward the open land beyond town. The night sky above the New Mexico territory was a revelation for someone raised in Philadelphia's gaslit streets. Stars spread across the darkness in impossible profusion, the Milky Way a river of light bisecting the heavens. The moon, just past full, painted the landscape in silver and shadow. Orville stopped the wagon on a small rise overlooking the valley. In the distance, Beatrice could see scattered lights from the ranches and farms spread across the land. Somewhere out there, her students slept in their beds, dreaming whatever dreams children dreamed. Thanks to Orville's generosity and foresight, they'd wake up tomorrow and continue learning instead of heading out to grueling labor in the fields. "It's beautiful up here," she said. "I come here sometimes when I need to think." There's something about seeing all that space that helps put things in perspective. He shifted on the wagon seat to face her. "Beatrice, I need to be clear about my intentions. I'm not a man who plays games or engages in casual flirtation. I wouldn't have guessed you were. I'm interested in courting you properly, spending time together, getting to know each other, seeing if this connection between us is real and lasting." He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "But I also know you're new to Chloride, still finding your place. If you need time, or if you're not interested in that way, I'll respect it. I won't make things awkward or uncomfortable." Beatrice looked at their joined hands, his large and work roughened, hers smaller but equally capable in their own way. She thought about the life she'd fled in Philadelphia, the future her stepfather had planned for her, marriage to some businessman who'd expect her to abandon her education and her dreams in service to his comfort. Orville Tucker was nothing like that. He'd proven himself to be a man who valued education, who respected her work, who saw her as an equal partner in a shared vision for the community. More than that, she simply liked being around him. He made her laugh. He challenged her thinking. He looked at her like she was simultaneously fascinating and entirely comprehensible, a paradox that somehow worked. "I'm interested," she said quietly. "Very interested. But you're right, I am still finding my place here. I don't want to rush into anything. We'll take it slow then. Dinners at the cafe, more dances. Maybe you could come visit the ranch, see where I live and work." He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm a patient man, Beatrice. Some things are worth waiting for." She leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, and together they watched the stars wheel slowly overhead. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, Beatrice felt like she might be exactly where she was meant to be. The courting that followed was everything proper and more wonderful than Beatrice had dared to hope. Orville came to town every Sunday after church for dinner at the small cafe next to the general store. They'd sit at the corner table, talking about everything and nothing, their conversations ranging from practical matters like the school's curriculum to philosophical discussions about the future of the territory. He brought her small gifts, always thoughtful, never excessive. A new set of chalk in various colors, a book of poetry by Walt Whitman he'd ordered special from Santa Fe, a warm shawl woven by a Navajo woman who lived near his ranch, the wool impossibly soft and dyed in shades of sage and sand. Beatrice visited his ranch one bright October afternoon, riding out with him after school dismissed for the week. The ranch house was simple but well built, a sturdy adobe structure with a covered porch facing west to catch the sunsets. Inside, she found a home that reflected its owner, practical but not without touches of beauty. Books lined a shelf near the fireplace. A quilt in a traditional pattern covered the bed in the room he'd prepared for his sister before she died. "I kept hoping she'd get strong enough to come live with me," Orville explained, running his hand over the quilt. "Made sure everything was ready for her. But then the pneumonia came on so fast and—" Beatrice took his hand, offering silent comfort. She understood loss, the way it carved hollow spaces in your heart that never quite filled again. He showed her the ranch operations, introducing her to the handful of men who worked for him year-round. They were good men, she could tell, loyal and hardworking. They treated Orville with respect that came from genuine regard, not fear or obligation. The cattle grazed across rolling hills dotted with juniper and pinon pines. Orville explained his breeding program, how he was working to develop stock that could thrive in the harsh territory conditions while still producing quality beef. "You've built something impressive here," Beatrice said as they sat on his porch watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible shades of orange and pink. "It's been my focus for years. But lately, I've been thinking it feels a bit empty. A ranch should have life in it, you know. Not just cattle and horses, but a family. Children learning to ride, laughter in the evening, someone to share the sunsets with." He looked at her meaningfully. Someone to build a future with, her heart hammered against her ribs. "Orville, I'm not proposing, not yet. Just letting you know where my thoughts are heading," he smiled. "Told you I'm not good at playing games. I appreciate that about you." As fall deepened toward winter, their relationship deepened too. The harvest season ended successfully, and every single one of Beatrice's students had remained in school throughout it, thanks to Orville's hired hands. The families threw a celebration at the town hall, thanking both Beatrice and Orville for their dedication to the children's education. "We've decided to make this a permanent arrangement," announced Mr. Henderson, speaking for the group of parents. "We've pooled resources to create a community fund. It won't be as much as Mr. Tucker paid this year, but it'll help hire hands for future harvests so our children can keep learning." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. This was more than she'd hoped for, a fundamental shift in how these families viewed education. Orville caught her eye across the crowd and winked. He'd quietly contributed to the community fund. She'd learned from Martha Patterson, though he'd insisted his donation remain anonymous. That night, after the celebration ended, Orville walked Beatrice back to the schoolhouse. They'd fallen into a comfortable pattern of evening walks, talking about their days, sharing observations about the town and its people, sometimes just enjoying the silence together. "You've changed things here," Orville said as they reached her door. "Really changed them. These families won't forget what education can mean for their children, and they won't let it slide away again. We changed things together." She turned to face him in the moonlight. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. Partners, then. Partners." He cupped her face gently in his hands, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't want to. His kiss was everything their courtship had been, patient and genuine, full of restrained passion and careful respect. She leaned into him, feeling something slot into place in her heart. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Orville rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Beatrice Davies. I think I've loved you since you stood in that schoolhouse doorway looking fierce and heartbroken about losing your students. But I know it for certain now." Joy bubbled up in her chest. "I love you too. You're the best man I've ever known, Orville Tucker. Marry me." The words came out rough, urgent. "I know we said we'd take things slow, but I'm sure. I've never been more sure of anything. Marry me and let's build this life together." Teaching and ranching and raising a family and making this corner of the territory better for everyone in it. Beatrice kissed him again, pouring everything she felt into it, all her hope and love and certainty. Yes, absolutely yes. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the town hall. Beatrice wore a new dress, cream-colored with blue ribbon trim, sewn by 3 of the mothers who insisted on contributing to her trousseau. She carried wildflowers gathered by her students, each child beaming with pride at being part of their teacher's special day. Orville wore his best suit, purchased new from the general store, and couldn't stop smiling. When the traveling judge asked if he took Beatrice to be his wife, his "I do" rang clear and strong, echoing through the hall. "I do too," Beatrice said when her turn came, not waiting for the formal question to finish. Laughter rippled through the gathered crowd. They held the reception right there, the whole town contributing food and music and well wishes. Martha Patterson cried happy tears. Mr. Henderson made a speech about second chances and the power of education and finding love in unexpected places. Even crusty old Mr. Morrison got a bit misty-eyed, though he blamed it on dust. As the celebration wound down and evening approached, Orville loaded Beatrice's belongings into his wagon. She'd already arranged for a replacement teacher to take over the schoolhouse, a young woman from Santa Fe who'd arrived 2 days prior and seemed earnest and capable. "You're sure about giving up teaching?" Orville asked as they prepared to leave for the ranch. "I'm not giving it up. I'm evolving it." Beatrice had thought long and hard about this decision. "The new teacher will handle daily lessons, but I'll still be involved with curriculum planning and special projects. And I've been thinking about starting a small library at the ranch, open to families in the area. Maybe hosting evening classes for adults who want to improve their reading and arithmetic." "That sounds perfect." He helped her onto the wagon seat, then climbed up beside her. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Tucker, Mrs. Tucker. Her new name, her new life," she smiled. "More than ready." The ride to the ranch took them through that familiar landscape she'd grown to love, all stark beauty and hidden resilience. The sun set behind them, casting long shadows across the land. Stars began appearing in the deepening blue above. When they reached the ranch house, Orville carried her over the threshold in the traditional manner, both of them laughing. He'd spent the previous week making improvements, adding feminine touches to the bedroom they'd now share, installing a better stove in the kitchen, building additional bookshelves in the main room. That night, they lay together in their bed, the window open to let in the cool air and the sound of night birds calling. Beatrice traced patterns on Orville's chest, marveling at the reality of their marriage. "Tell me again about the library," he said, his voice sleepy and content. "I want to order books from back east. Not just educational texts, but novels and poetry and histories. Things people can read for pleasure, not just learning. We could keep them here and families could borrow whatever they wanted. Maybe once a month we could host gatherings where we discuss what we've read." "I like that idea. We've got the space and the resources to buy the books." He kissed the top of her head. "You know what else we've got space for?" "What?" "Children of our own, eventually. Running around the ranch, learning to read from their mother's books, learning to ranch from their father, making this house feel full and alive." Beatrice pressed closer to him, warmth spreading through her at the thought. "Eventually, I'd like that very much." Their first year of marriage unfolded with its share of challenges and joys. Winter came hard, bringing snow that transformed the landscape into something alien and beautiful. Beatrice learned to cook on the wood stove, to preserve food for the lean months, to help with basic ranch work when extra hands were needed. The library project flourished beyond her expectations. She ordered books through catalogs, spent hours corresponding with publishers and distributors, gradually built a collection that filled the new shelves Orville installed along 2 walls of their main room. Families began visiting regularly to borrow books, staying for coffee and conversation. The monthly discussion gatherings became highlights of the social calendar, drawing people from as far as 15 miles away. She also discovered she was pregnant in March, a realization that brought tears of joy to both her and Orville's eyes. "A baby," he kept saying, his hand splayed gently across her still flat stomach. "We're having a baby. Are you happy?" Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He kissed her thoroughly. "You've made my life complete, Beatrice Tucker. I didn't even know how empty it was until you filled it." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through spring and into summer. Beatrice continued her work with the library and her consultations with the school, though she tired more easily as the months passed. Orville became almost comically protective, insisting she rest frequently, avoiding heavy work, eating the most nutritious foods. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she protested after he tried to carry her upstairs because he worried about her climbing. "Humor me. This is my first time being a father. I'm probably going to be ridiculously overprotective about both you and the baby for the rest of our lives. I suppose I can live with that." Their son was born on a warm September evening, delivered by the midwife from town with Orville pacing anxiously outside until he heard the baby's first cry. When he was finally allowed in, he approached the bed with something like awe on his face. "A boy," Beatrice said, exhausted and exhilarated. "We have a son." Orville took the tiny bundle carefully, looking down at the red, wrinkled face with absolute devotion. "He's perfect. You're both perfect." His voice cracked slightly. "What should we name him?" They discussed names throughout the pregnancy, never quite settling on anything that felt right. Now, looking at her husband holding their child with such tenderness, Beatrice knew exactly what his name should be. "Thomas, after your father. Thomas Orville Tucker." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Your father would be proud of the man you've become, the father you'll be. It's a good name for a good legacy." Little Tommy proved to be a relatively easy baby, quick to smile and content to observe the world from his mother's arms or the cradle Orville had built with his own hands. He had Orville's hazel eyes and Beatrice's dark hair, and both parents were utterly besotted. The ranch continued to prosper. Orville expanded his operations, building a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing. Beatrice's library grew, becoming a vital community resource. Some evenings, she'd nurse Tommy while reading aloud to a group gathered in their main room, sharing stories of far-off places and different times. When Tommy was 2 years old, Beatrice became pregnant again. Their daughter, Clara, was born in spring of 1886, named for Orville's lost sister. She arrived with a full head of red hair, a surprise since neither parent was a redhead, though Orville's mother had been. "She's going to be a firecracker," the midwife predicted, and she was right. Clara was more demanding than Tommy had been, louder and more insistent. But she was also quick to laugh, affectionate, and showed signs of remarkable intelligence even as an infant. With 2 young children, life became busier but richer. Beatrice learned to balance motherhood with her other passions, often involving the children in her work. Tommy would sit on the floor looking at picture books, while she consulted with the current schoolteacher about curriculum. Clara would nap in a basket nearby during the monthly library discussions. The school continued to thrive. The community fund for harvest help had become institutionalized, ensuring that education never again took a back seat to agricultural needs. Several of Beatrice's original students were now teenagers, and 2 had expressed interest in becoming teachers themselves when they were old enough. "You've started something that will outlast all of us," Orville said one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. Tommy played with wooden cattle Orville had carved, making them march across the porch boards. Clara dozed in Beatrice's arms, her tiny hand fisted in her mother's shirt. "We started it together," Beatrice corrected. "None of this would exist without your vision and generosity. I just provided money. You provided the heart." She leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and sunshine and home. 7 years had passed since she'd arrived in Chloride, lost and hopeful and terrified. 7 years since Orville Tucker had walked into her empty schoolhouse with an outrageous proposal. Looking back now, she could trace how every challenge and every joy had woven together to create this life. The students she'd feared losing had become the foundation for a stronger educational system. The loneliness she'd felt as an outsider had transformed into deep community connections. The fear that she'd never find love on her own terms had given way to a marriage that exceeded her wildest dreams. "What are you thinking about?" Orville asked. "How grateful I am for all of it, the hard parts and the easy parts, the way everything came together even when it seemed impossible. You know what I'm grateful for?" "What?" "That I got my hair cut before I came to visit you that first time. If I'd shown up looking like a scraggly ranch hand, you might have turned me away." Beatrice laughed, the sound carrying across their land. "Oh, I doubt that. You had kind eyes. I noticed them immediately, scruffy hair or not." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and stars emerged. Tommy eventually climbed into Orville's lap, his small body fitting perfectly against his father's chest. The 4 of them formed a tableau of contentment, a family carved out of courage and unexpected grace. Years continued to pass, bringing changes and continuities in equal measure. Tommy grew into a thoughtful boy who loved both books and ranching, equally comfortable discussing literature as he was working cattle. Clara proved every bit the firecracker predicted, brilliant and fierce, and determined to prove she could do anything her brother could do. A 3rd child arrived when Tommy was 8 and Clara 6, another boy they named Samuel after Beatrice's father. He was quieter than his siblings, gentle-natured and observant, content to spend hours watching ants march across the porch or clouds drift overhead. The ranch expanded steadily. Orville took on more permanent workers, building a bunkhouse and treating his employees like extended family. Several of the men who'd worked for him for years brought wives to the territory, and soon children from those families were attending the school in Chloride, borrowing books from the Tucker Library. Beatrice's library had outgrown the shelves in their home. With help from the community, they built a separate structure on the ranch property, a small but sturdy building dedicated entirely to books and learning. It held over 500 volumes now, a treasure trove in a region where books were still precious commodities. She started teaching again when Samuel was old enough to not need constant supervision, not in the schoolhouse, but in her own way. She offered lessons to children who lived too far from town to attend regular school, taught adult literacy classes in the evenings, and mentored young women who wanted to become teachers themselves. The original schoolteacher who'd replaced her had moved on after a few years, but Beatrice had been instrumental in finding quality replacements. She'd developed relationships with teacher training colleges back east, creating a pipeline of educated young women willing to come to the territory. She personally welcomed each new teacher, helped them adjust to Western life, and supported them through the inevitable challenges. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Orville surprised her with a trip to Santa Fe. They left the children in the care of trusted friends and spent 3 days in the territorial capital, staying in a real hotel with indoor plumbing and electric lights. "This is wonderful," Beatrice said, soaking in a proper bathtub for the first time in a decade. "Though I have to admit, I'm already missing the children and the ranch. We can go home tomorrow if you want." Orville sat on the edge of the tub, fully clothed, grinning at her. "I didn't say that. I can miss them and still enjoy this decadent luxury." She splashed water at him playfully. "Besides, when's the last time we had a whole evening to ourselves?" They dined at a fancy restaurant, saw a theatrical performance, and walked through streets lit by electric lamps. It was exciting and strange, a glimpse of how much the world was changing beyond their ranch. "Do you ever regret choosing this life?" Orville asked as they walked back to the hotel. "You could have stayed in Philadelphia or moved to a big city out here, taught in a real school with resources and support." Beatrice stopped walking, turning to face him under a street lamp. "Orville Tucker, I need you to listen carefully. I have never, not for one single moment, regretted our life. You and our children and the work we do, that's more valuable than anything I could have achieved in a city school. We've built something real and lasting. We've changed lives. How could I possibly regret that?" He kissed her right there on the street, not caring who might see. "I love you more every year. Didn't think that was possible, but you keep proving me wrong. Good, because you're stuck with me for the rest of your life." They returned to the ranch refreshed and more deeply connected than ever. The children mobbed them at the door, each one talking over the others to share everything that had happened during the separation. Samuel had lost a tooth. Clara had finished reading an entire book by herself. Tommy had helped birth a calf and felt very grown up about it. Life settled back into its comfortable rhythms. The days marked by ranch work and child rearing, by books lent and returned, by lessons taught and learned. The territory moved toward statehood, bringing political changes and increased settlement. Chloride grew slowly, gaining a proper telegraph office and a second general store. Emma Porter, the little girl who'd once brought Beatrice wildflowers before her first date with Orville, graduated from the school at 14 and announced her intention to become a teacher. Beatrice mentored her personally, loaning her books and sharing teaching strategies. When Emma was 19, she left for teacher training in Missouri. She wrote faithfully, describing her education and her plans to return to New Mexico. "We're creating a legacy," Beatrice told Orville after reading one of Emma's letters. "A whole generation that values education because of what we started." "What you started," he corrected gently. "I just helped. No, we're partners in this, just like we're partners in everything else." When Tommy turned 16, he took on more responsibility at the ranch, working alongside his father and proving himself a capable cattleman. But he also spent hours in the library, reading everything from agricultural texts to philosophy. He developed a particular interest in land management and conservation, ideas that were just beginning to gain traction. "I want to make the ranch better, not just bigger," he explained at dinner one night. "Find ways to work with the land instead of just using it up." Orville listened carefully to his son's ideas, taking them seriously even when they challenged his own methods. "You'll be running this place someday. Makes sense that you do things your own way." Clara, at 14, had become a force of nature. She could outride most of the ranch hands, had memorized entire books of poetry, and had strong opinions about women's suffrage and labor rights. She drove her parents to distraction and made them incredibly proud in equal measure. "I'm not getting married," she announced one evening. "I'm going to be a doctor or a lawyer or maybe both." "That's fine, sweetheart," Beatrice said, hiding her smile, "but you're 14. You don't have to decide everything right now. I know what I want, just like you knew when you came to the territory." Beatrice couldn't argue with that. She saw so much of her younger self in Clara, that same fierce determination to forge her own path. Samuel, at 10, was the family's quiet heart. He gentled horses with remarkable skill, could track animals across rocky ground, and showed an artistic talent that surprised everyone. He filled notebooks with sketches of the ranch, the landscape, wildlife, and his family. "You could be a real artist," Beatrice told him, looking through his latest drawings. "Maybe. Or maybe I'll just draw for fun and do something else too." He considered his sketch of a hawk in flight. "Is it okay to be good at something and not make it your whole life?" "That's very wise, sweetheart. Yes, it's absolutely okay." On their 15th wedding anniversary, the entire community threw them a celebration. It seemed like everyone within 20 miles showed up at the ranch, bringing food and music and heartfelt testimonials about how the Tuckers had impacted their lives. Former students, now young adults, spoke about how staying in school during harvest had changed their futures. Parents talked about the lending library and evening classes. Ranch hands praised Orville's fair treatment and steady leadership. The current school teacher credited Beatrice's ongoing support as essential to her success. 15 years ago, I showed up at a schoolhouse with a half-formed idea and a lot of hope," Orville said when called upon to speak. "Best decision I ever made, because it brought me into Beatrice's life. Everything good that's happened since stems from that moment." Beatrice dabbed at her eyes, moved beyond words. Looking around at the crowd, at the children who'd benefited from education, at the community that had grown stronger through shared commitment to learning, she felt overwhelming gratitude. Later, after the guests had departed and their own children had fallen asleep exhausted from the celebration, Beatrice and Orville sat on their porch in the darkness. 15 years, Beatrice mused. "It's gone so fast, and yet it feels like I've always known you. Think we'll make it to 50. "I absolutely think we'll make it to 50, and you'll still be bringing me thoughtful gifts and stepping on my toes during dances." He laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Probably true, though I'd like to think my dancing has improved." "It has. You only step on my toes half as often now." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands like they had that first night on the rise overlooking the valley, when they'd confessed their feelings under the stars. So much had changed since then. They'd built a family, expanded the ranch, created community resources that would outlast them. They'd weathered droughts and market downturns, childhood illnesses and difficult births, conflicts and reconciliations. Through it all, their partnership had remained solid, built on mutual respect and genuine love. They'd grown together rather than apart, adapting as life demanded while never losing sight of their shared values. "What are you hoping for?" Orville asked. "In the next 15 years, Beatrice considered the question carefully. "I want to see our children grow into whoever they're meant to be. I want to continue expanding access to education. I want to grow old with you on this porch, watching sunsets and counting our blessings." That sounds perfect to me. The years that followed brought both joy and heartache. They lost dear friends to illness and accidents, suffered a devastating drought that tested the ranch's resilience, celebrated weddings and births throughout the community. Tommy fell in love with a neighbor's daughter, a sensible young woman who shared his passion for conservation. They married when he was 22 and she 20, building a small house on Tucker land and starting their own family. Clara defied expectations by leaving for college back east, one of the first women from the territory to do so. She wrote passionate letters about her studies, her suffrage work, her plans to change the world. She did eventually become a lawyer, passing the bar in 1902 and returning to New Mexico to practice. Samuel, true to his gentle nature, became a teacher. He combined his artistic talents with his love of nature, taking children on outdoor lessons where they drew plants and animals while learning about the ecosystem. He never married, content with his students and his art and his place within the extended Tucker family. Beatrice and Orville became grandparents multiple times over, their home filling regularly with Tommy's children and later Clara's daughter. The ranch remained prosperous, adapting to changing markets and incorporating Tommy's conservation practices. The library continued growing, now holding over 1,000 books and serving as a community center for the entire region. On their 30th anniversary, they traveled back to that rise overlooking the valley, where Orville had first told her he loved her. They were in their 50s now, their hair graying, their bodies showing the wear of 3 decades of hard work, but their connection remained as strong as ever. "No regrets?" Orville asked, echoing that question from years ago. "Not a single one. You. Only that I didn't meet you sooner." He pulled her close, and they stood together watching the sun set over land they'd worked and loved and protected. "But I guess the timing was right. We were both ready for each other when we met." Wise man. "Took me 30 years of marriage to get that way." She laughed, the sound carrying across the empty land. "I love you, Orville Tucker. Still. Always." "I love you too, Beatrice Tucker. Best decision I ever made, walking into that schoolhouse looking for the teacher who was losing her students." They stayed on the rise until full darkness fell and the stars emerged in their countless thousands. Below them, lights twinkled from scattered homes, each one representing a life they'd touched in some way. The schoolhouse still stood in Chloride, now much larger than the original building, educating a new generation. The lending library on their ranch had inspired similar projects in neighboring towns. The harvest that had once stolen children from their education no longer held that power. The community structures they'd helped create ensured that work and learning could coexist, that children didn't have to choose between helping their families and building their futures. It was a quiet legacy, built not through grand gestures but through consistent dedication and the courage to believe that things could be better. It was built on love, partnership, and an unwavering commitment to making their corner of the world a little bit brighter. As they rode back to the ranch house, to the family and life they'd built together, Beatrice felt profound peace. She'd come to the New Mexico territory searching for escape and freedom. She'd found those things, but so much more besides. She'd found purpose, community, family, and a love that had sustained her through everything life could offer. The schoolhouse door that had hung crooked on its hinges that autumn day in 1882 had been replaced long ago, but Beatrice still remembered standing there, watching her students disappear to the harvest, feeling helpless and heartbroken. She remembered the moment Orville Tucker walked through that door with his gentle eyes and outrageous proposal, changing everything. Some doors led exactly where they were supposed to go. Some crooked doorways opened onto straight paths that led to home, their home, together, always.